What was it like to wake up in a cold and dark 14th century house when every day could be your last because of hunger, disease, and constant warfare? The life of an artisan in medieval England was lived without modern conveniences, with minimal resources and a daily struggle for survival, where every action was of utmost importance. This video takes an in-depth look at a day in the life of such a person, from the first moments of waking up in the faint light of a candle to the nightly reflections filled with fears, hopes, and unquenchable faith in the best. Shows how a craftsman prepared his tools, created his wares, interacted with family and neighbors, faced dangers, and found the strength to go on. This is not just a story. It is a live immersion into a world where craft was not only a profession, but also a way to survive in a cruel and unpredictable world. A true medieval day is revealed in every detail. Early mornings, waking up and first worries. In 14th century England, a craftsman woke up at dawn when the first rays of sunlight barely penetrated the cramped and damp dwelling. Candles were rarely used. Wood and oil were expensive and hard to obtain. The fire in the hearth was lighted carefully so as not to waste fuel, for the wood was gathered by hand, and the winter was harsh and long. The morning chill pierced the walls of wood and stone, offering no protection from wind and damp. Breakfast was meager: stale bread, oatmeal, or some beans, sometimes soaked in water. The food could keep up his strength, but it was not nourishing. For a craftsman, energy was important. He had a hard day's work ahead of him. Preparing for the day involved checking and sharpening tools, preparing the workplace, and gathering the necessary materials. Every slip-up could result in the loss of valuable resources, and thus hunger for the family. With the instability after the Black Death and constant warfare, the artisan understood. The success of the day was the key to survival. Therefore, the first hours were a time of silent concentration and gathering strength for the coming struggle. The morning set the tone for the day, for the workshop was a family affair, and the division of duties began at that moment. In this cold, semi-dark space, hope and strength of spirit awoke. Even among the simple details of everyday life, low light, meager food, and damp air, the steadfastness of those who survived in the harshness of 14th century England was evident. Communication with family and life in the artisan's home. The dwelling of an artisan in 14th century England was extremely cramped and modest. Just one or two rooms where wooden beams and earthen walls barely protected from cold and damp. Under these conditions, the house served simultaneously as a workshop, living quarters, and fortress, where every corner was utilized to its maximum potential, and the family was the basis of survival and support. The cramped quarters required constant mutual aid. Wives and children helped the artisan by carrying materials, sewing or sharpening tools, together maintaining a common labor process and household. Inside stood a rough wooden table and benches, and the hearth was the center of warmth and light around which the whole family gathered to share meager meals and weariness. Life was harsh, but chronicles show that artisans' homes often became centers of social life, where neighbors met to help and exchange news, especially in winter. During the colder months, the streets were empty, and the home became a symbol of comfort, protection, and hope, where stories by the fire and prayers created an atmosphere of peace. The constant sounds of work, children's laughter, and adult conversations intertwined, filling the room with a lively and intense everyday life that shaped the spirit of the family in the workshop. Research confirms that shared hardship and crowdedness strengthened family bonds, as everyone was involved in the struggle for survival, which helped withstand external dangers. The thick walls of the house and closed shutters protected the family from cold, raids, and disease, but it was still damp and cold inside, requiring constant care to keep the fire going. Simple family rituals, shared meals, prayers, and brief rests by the hearth kept strength and spirit alive, making the home a stronghold of hope and resilience. Thus, the domestic and family life of an artisan was a single whole, where every day is a continuous struggle and care for each other in the harsh conditions of the 14th century. The house served not only as a refuge from the outside world, but also as a center where lived the hope, will, and resilience needed to survive in challenging times. Preparing tools and workplace. A craftsman in 14th century England would start the day with a thorough inspection of his tools, realizing that even the slightest breakage could stop work and lead to loss, because there were almost no spare parts. Each knife, hammer, or saw was carefully inspected for cracks, chips, and wear, because in a time of material scarcity, economy and quality were more important than speed. Tools were sharpened with special care. Sharpening stones, which could last for years, required proper care. Otherwise, they lost their properties and deteriorated the quality of the artisan's work. The workplace was thoroughly cleaned of dust and chips to avoid accidental damage to products and tools, and order was maintained, essential for efficient work in cramped conditions. The wood surfaces of the table and shelves were treated with oil or wax, if available, to prevent swelling and rotting, for humidity was a constant problem in the dwelling. Preparation also included inspecting workbenches and fixtures that were repaired by themselves, because seeking help from craftsmen was expensive and not always possible. Historical sources indicate that craftsmen of those times often passed down the skills of tool preparation from generation to generation, which preserved craftsmanship and minimized the risk of defects. Special attention was paid to saving materials. Every wood chip, metal scrap was saved and recycled at the earliest opportunity so that nothing went to waste. Working without serviceable tools meant not only wasting time, but also life-threatening, as injuries were common among artisans and medical attention was rare. Before starting work, the artisan would prepare lighting, candles or oil lamps that burned dimly and sparingly, illuminating the workspace but not giving off excessive heat so as not to waste precious resources. Careful preparation of tools and workplace was not a formality. It had a direct impact on the quality of the products on which the family's income and livelihood depended. In the workshop, there was no room for haste. Each operation was carefully planned to avoid mistakes and scrap, because the artisan lived on the edge of survival and knew the price of each nail. Checking and sharpening took up a good part of the morning, because only perfectly prepared tools allowed you to work faster and with less effort, which is especially important during the long winter months. The ability to preserve and restore tools distinguished an experienced craftsman from a novice, and it was often the key to reputation and stable earnings. Historians note that some craft guilds had strict rules for the care and storage of tools, reflecting the importance of this stage of the work. Thus, the preparation of tools and workspace was not just a routine act, but a ritual that reflected care, economy, and a deep respect for the craft. With limited resources and the constant threat of starvation, the artisan realized that careful handling of tools was the key to survival and success in his hard work. Each carefully sharpened knife and repaired hammer became an integral part of the artisan's household, contributing to the creation of a quality product and providing stability to the family's life. The workplace was designed for long hours and hard work, where comfort and order helped to maintain concentration and prevent accidents. Using limited materials as efficiently as possible and attention to detail were characteristic of 14th century artisans, especially after socioeconomic upheavals and epidemics. Historical reconstructions show that workshops were often small and poorly lit, making tool preparation a particularly important step in maintaining quality and safety. Only by preparing his tools and workplace carefully and respectfully could the artisan begin the difficult and painstaking work, which required not only strength but also great skill. This daily ritual was the key to a quality product at the end of a hard day's work, on which a family's life and well-being depended in the challenging world of medieval England. Workshop work, the process of creating a product. Work on the creation of a product in the workshop of a craftsman of the 14th century began with a careful selection and preparation of materials, on which directly depended the quality and durability of the future object, whether it was a sword, a shoe, or a pottery pot. For example, when making a sword, a blacksmith would first melt iron in a forge, maintaining the temperature of the crucible with bellows, and then taking out the red-hot metal, strike it with a hammer to shape the workpiece. Each blow was calculated, requiring strength and precision, because the metal had to be not only red-hot, but also properly cooled to get the necessary hardness without brittleness, which meant repeating the process many times. When making shoes, the saddler cut and sewed leather parts by hand, using sharp knives and thick needles with strong threads, and each stitch required great care so that the shoes would last long and would not spread in wet weather. The potter in his workshop began by kneading the clay, which was carefully cleaned of stones and impurities, then molded the product on a potter's wheel, which was driven by his foot, controlling the shape and thickness of the walls. All stages required not only physical strength, but also complete concentration, because the slightest mistake could lead to a marriage, a broken blade, a hole in the boot, or a crack in the pot. The workplace was full of noise, the sounds of hammering on metal, the creaks of a knife on leather, and the monotonous turning of a potter's wheel provided a backdrop in which the artisan found rhythm and concentration for his work. The physical strain was great. Many operations required standing on one's feet for hours, exerting effort with one's arms and back. And the hard labor was tiring, especially in cold seasons without supplemental heating. Historians note that artisans often suffered from joint diseases and injuries because their work was monotonous but intense and medical care was almost non-existent. Each stage of the creation of the product was thought out and worked out to the point of automatism. First, the preparation of blanks, then assembly or molding, followed by sanding and finishing to give the finished object functionality and aesthetic appearance. Moving from one operation to the next involved changing tools and positions, which helped reduce fatigue but required constant attention and discipline. Mistakes were expensive. Raw materials and time were in short supply, so the artisan always strove for maximum economy and quality because his earnings and reputation depended on it. In the process of making a sword, the blacksmith had to consider not only the technical characteristics, but also the aesthetic details, designs, engraving, balance, which made the work both a craft and an art. The shoemaker customized each pair by measuring and trying on parts, because the comfort and durability of shoes were essential to everyday life. The potter, after molding, left the product to dry and then fired in the kiln, controlling the temperature so that the pot did not crack and acquired the strength necessary to store food and water. The workshop was a place where every day was a struggle with materials and time. Items had to be finished before holidays, markets, or military campaigns, which required organization and stamina. The craftsman understood that not only the result of his work, but also the well-being of the whole family depended on his skill and concentration, which added responsibility and incentive for quality work. Historical sources confirm that the workshops of the 14th century were centers not only of production, but also of knowledge transfer, where young apprentices learned their skills under the supervision of experienced tutors. Working with materials required patience and skill, because metal, leather, and clay are living substances with which we had to find a common language, respect their properties and limitations. Mistakes and rejections were taken hard, because there was often not enough time or money to repeat the work, and the artisan could lose orders and the trust of customers. Nevertheless, it was through this complex, painstaking process that products were created that served people for years, helping them in their daily lives, war, or household. Understanding the complexity and physical effort required to create each object helps to better appreciate the skill and labor of the artisans of the era whose hands created the foundation of the medieval world. Thus, the process of making a product in the workshop was not only a craft, but also a test of patience, strength, and skill, reflecting the spirit and realities of medieval life. Each completed item was the result of many hours of painstaking labor, where concentration and physical stamina were as important as knowledge and experience. Interaction with customers and the market. The craftsman in 14th century England built his connections with his customers, primarily through local fairs, which were held on fixed dates and were centers of trade and exchange of news between villages and towns. At these fairs, he exhibited his wares, demonstrating quality and craftsmanship while engaging in lively negotiations with potential customers looking for durable and reliable goods. Recommendations of neighbors and regular customers were especially important because in conditions of economic instability, trust became the main currency, and the quality of work, the key to long-term relationships. In those conditions, the artisan often faced difficulties, seasonal fluctuations in demand, changes in raw material prices, and risks of losing orders due to competition or economic turmoil. Trade at fairs was an art of persuasion and compromise, where every word and gesture mattered, because price and lead time could decide the fate of the workshop and the family. Historical records show that craft guilds actively supported their members by regulating prices and protecting the interests of craftsmen, which helped maintain stability in times of instability. In addition to fairs, The artisan often relied on regular customers, neighbors, landowners, merchants, who needed regular deliveries of wares or repairs of already used items. In such relationships, honesty and honoring agreements were important, because in medieval society, reputation was valued above all else, and a bad name could lead to the collapse of a business. In some cases, transactions were made orally, without written contracts, which required a high level of responsibility and mutual respect between the parties. A craftsman had to be able to quickly navigate the demands of the market, adjust to the tastes and needs of customers, as well as to take into account the impact of external factors: wars, crop failures, epidemics. For example, during plagues or military conflicts, the demand for certain items would drop dramatically and customers would become more demanding and cautious about spending. Under such conditions, trading became a constant test of survival skills and finding ways to support the family and the workshop. Negotiations often took place in the noisy environment of fairs, where the artisan had to combine benevolence with firmness to get a fair price and terms without losing the respect and trust of his customers. He could offer discounts to loyal customers or negotiate lead times to retain customers and ensure steady income. Historians note that negotiation skills were an integral part of craftsmanship, and successful craftsmen often became respected figures in their community. The craft trade in the 14th century was closely linked to a network of social and economic relationships, where every customer could become a patron and every recommendation an opportunity to expand the business. At the same time, the artisan was always under pressure to balance quality, price, and deadlines, which required experience, patience, and strategic thinking. Understanding customer needs and the ability to adapt to market changes determined the long-term success and survival of the workshop in the difficult conditions of the time. Thus, interaction with customers in the marketplace was a constant, living part of an artisan's life, where every word and every action could affect the future of his business and family. These relationships were built on trust, mutual respect, and the ability to find common ground in the complex and unstable economic conditions of medieval England. Without a successful trade and regular customers, even the most skilled artisan risked falling by the wayside, making this one of the most important areas in the daily fate of the craftsman. Lunch and modest rest are rare moments of peace. The 14th century artisan's lunch was a modest but vital meal that most often consisted of a simple chowder made from beans, vegetables, and sometimes cereals, supplemented with stale bread and cold water drawn from a well or river. Such food was not only affordable, but also nutritious, because beans and bread provided the necessary energy to continue the hard work, although by modern standards, this diet seemed very meager and monotonous. Historical sources indicate that medieval artisans often suffered from vitamin and protein deficiencies, but such simple meals helped maintain strength in the face of constant physical exertion and harsh climates. The lunch break was short and took place mostly in the cold, poorly heated workshop or in a corner of the house, where the artisan could briefly set aside his tools and pant, trying to warm himself from the chilly wind and damp. In these moments of rest, even if they lasted only 10 or 15 minutes, an important recuperation of strength took place, which made it possible to continue the hard work until the evening without succumbing to fatigue or fainting. Socially, it was also a moment of small fellowship with family or neighbors, where between spoonfuls of chowder, news could be exchanged, and a spirit so needed in hard times could be maintained. The meager ration was compensated by the artisan's efforts to maintain high morale and discipline, for the proper distribution of forces and the ability to pause in time were the most important conditions for survival. Many chronicles of the time note that the denial of adequate rest and nutrition could lead to chronic fatigue and decreased productivity, jeopardizing not only the workshop but the entire family. Thus, even a minimal lunch break was of great importance in maintaining the health and working capacity of the medieval craftsman. Food was most often prepared in advance, sometimes even the night before, and heated over an open fire in a fireplace or stove, which added the smoky smell and flavor so familiar to the time. Water was the most readily available beverage, as alcohol was often considered a luxury or consumed in small doses due to its high cost. And fresh fruit and dairy products were rare, especially in winter. The significance of lunch went beyond mere satiation. It was a necessity to support the body against the hunger, cold and physical exhaustion that had to be faced every day. The craftsmen realized that ignoring such breaks could lead to work errors, broken tools, and even injury, which made lunch and rest an element of industrial safety at the time. In the colder months, a short rest by the fire or against the wall of the house was the only source of warmth and a small consolation in a hard life, which added to its value in the mind of the craftsman. Historical reconstructors who study the life of medieval artisans emphasize that it was these rare moments of rest that allowed them to maintain physical stamina and psychological stability under harsh conditions. Sometimes during lunch, the artisan had time to evaluate his tools, plans, and orders, which helped mentally switch gears and prepare for the next hours of work with renewed vigor and determination. These pauses were also times for short prayers or reflections, for religiosity was an important part of life and a support in difficult times, giving meaning to even the simplest and most humble moments. As a result, lunch and short vacations became little islands of stability and comfort that helped the artisan confront the harsh realities of the 14th century. The dangers and challenges are disease, famine, and wars. The life of an artisan in the 14th century was constantly accompanied by threats that came not only from hard labor, but also from terrible epidemics, such as the plague that killed millions between 1347 and 1351, drastically reducing the population of England and creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. In addition to disease, the artisan was plagued by tax levies from the crown and local lords, who demanded substantial sums from villagers and towns to support troops or build castles, often leaving the family destitute. Bandit raids and devastation by military detachments became frequent ordeals. As with frequent conflicts and weak central authority, artisans and their families were often defenseless against violence and plunder. Plague epidemics not only decimated the population, but also undermined the economy, leading to labor shortages and reduced demand for handicrafts, which directly affected the income of the craftsman and his family. Historical records indicate that many artisans lost loved ones and neighbors, adding to the psychological pressure and sense of constant threat even in their own homes. Folk remedies, religious rituals, and primitive hygiene measures were used to protect against disease, but there was very little knowledge of the causes and modes of transmission. Hunger caused by crop failures and interruptions in food supplies was another serious problem, as the constant lack of food reduced physical endurance and increased mortality among the population. The artisan had to economize and distribute supplies with great care so that there would be enough for the whole family, especially during the cold winter months when work became even harder and nutritious food was rare. Many historians emphasize that survival during such periods depended not only on skill and strength, but also on the ability to adapt to harsh conditions and maintain social ties for mutual aid. 17th century wars and conflicts were a constant backdrop to life, and artisans often witnessed soldiers' marches, requisitions, and violent conscriptions, which undermined stability and threatened security. Tax levies to finance the war effort burdened peasants and townspeople, forcing artisans to cut back on materials and tools, which adversely affected the quality of work. Fear of ruin and loss of property was a constant companion, forcing the workshop to become both a home and a fortress, where every door and window protected not only from the cold, but also from external dangers. To minimize risks, artisans tried to maintain good relations with local authorities and neighbors by organizing themselves into guilds and communities that could organize collective protection and help in times of trouble. Religious faith also played an important role, providing moral support and hope for salvation in hard times when disease, famine, and war seemed insurmountable challenges. The scriptures and chronicles of those years describe how artisans sought solace in prayers and rituals in an attempt to protect themselves from the evil spirit of sickness and poverty. However, neither disease, famine, nor war could break the spirit of the artisan who fought daily for his life and the life of his family, learning to survive and preserve the craftsmanship passed down from generation to generation. These trials shaped a man's character and strength, making him resilient and resourceful, for it was the only way to survive the harsh realities of medieval England. The life of an artisan was full of dangers, but it was in this struggle that the real human fortitude and wisdom, without which it is impossible to imagine survival in the 14th century, were manifested. Evening work and preparation for the night. In the evening, the craftsman would summarize the day's work, carefully inspecting his tools, repairing minor damage, and preparing everything needed for tomorrow, for there was almost never a stock of new materials and tools. This period was important not only to maintain workflow, but also to prevent breakdowns that could be costly and lead to downtime, especially given limited resources and the need to save money. Preparation of tools included sharpening, oiling, and checking for integrity, which required patience and attention to detail, because their condition directly depended on the success of the work. In addition to the workshop, special attention was paid to preparing the dwelling for the night. Firewood was gathered to keep the fire in the hearth, which kept warm and served as a means of protection from the cold, as well as deterring wild animals and unwanted guests. The cold nights in medieval England were brutal, especially in winter, so every bit of wood and straw counted, and poorly insulated homes could be a deadly ordeal. The artisan and his family carefully reinforced the windows and doors, lining them with straw or cloth to keep the heat in and to create a barrier against noise and light, which served as an additional defense against thieves and robbers. Historical evidence shows that many workshops and dwellings had simple deadbolts and wooden shields, which the artisan would check before going to bed to make sure his home was secure. The evening routine also included small repairs, fixing cracks in the walls, mending roofs or strengthening steps, because winter was approaching and any little thing could cause trouble. Of particular importance was the organization of space. Tools were arranged in places so as not to waste time looking for them in the morning and not to create chaos, which helped to maintain order and discipline in the workshop. The light of the evening was kept alive by the meager flames of candles or oil lamps, which created a special atmosphere, causing the artisan to concentrate on small jobs and reflecting on the past day and future plans. After all the business was done, it was time for a short rest, during which one could share a modest dinner with the family, discuss the news, or simply listen to the silence that filled the house. At such moments, a silence grew, interrupted only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the night, which made the evening especially deep and meaningful. Preparing for the night also included caring for the children and older family members, putting them to bed and trying to create some comfort and safety in the harsh conditions. The artisan understood that it is in these moments that the basis of survival is laid. The ability not only to work, but also to conserve strength, to take care of home and loved ones, to meet the new day with renewed energy. Hard work and constant vigilance formed the rhythm of life, where the evening hours were the transition from bustle to the calm so necessary to maintain the balance between danger and hope. To summarize, the evening work was no less important than the day's labor, for it was what secured the tools and property and set the stage for the next day, full of challenges and new tasks. The time before bed allowed the artisan to evaluate what he had done, to think about the future, and to strengthen the inner spirit that helped him to withstand the harsh conditions of the Middle Ages. Thus, the evening routine became a key element not only of daily life, but also a strategy for survival and success in the 14th century craftsman's profession. Communicating with neighbors and community impact. Community in medieval England was not just a social structure, but a vital survival mechanism, bringing together artisans, peasants, and traders for mutual support in times of need. Mutual aid manifested itself in the exchange of tools and knowledge, working together in the fields or building houses, which greatly lightened the burden of everyday hardships and strengthened ties between people. Historical records show that without the support of the community, many artisans could not have survived epidemics, crop failures, or military raids, for together they created a strong barrier against external threats. The community also played the role of a cultural center, where joint festivals, religious rituals, and folk festivals were held, giving people the opportunity to relax, strengthen their spirits, and maintain their moral health. The church was the heart of the community, and prayers and celebrations together connected people, giving meaning and hope in times of adversity such as droughts or war. These events brought different generations together, passing on traditions and knowledge, and fostering a sense of belonging and responsibility for the common welfare. Communication with neighbors included sharing news, discussing prices for materials and products, and jointly planning and organizing fairs, which were an important part of an artisan's economic life. At fairs, the artisan could not only sell products, but also learn about new technologies, trends, and changes in demand, which helped to stay competitive and develop professionally. Mutual ties were strengthened through marriages and arrangements that created support networks and provided stability even in times of instability. In hard times, such as during plague epidemics, the community organized collective efforts to care for the sick and support the poor, greatly increasing the chances of survival for the most vulnerable members of society. Historical chronicles describe how artisans helped each other in repairing workshops or buying expensive materials together, which was impossible to do alone. The community also acted as an arbiter in conflicts and disputes, preventing discord and promoting peaceful coexistence, which is essential to maintaining general order. It was not uncommon for artisans to guard a village or town together, creating impromptu squads to repel raids and protect property, demonstrating that strength lies in unity. Community structures included elders and representatives who handled administrative matters and regulated the guilds, ensuring fairness and order in the craft environment. Thus, the influence of the community went far beyond domestic relationships, becoming a key element of social and economic stability in medieval society. The support of neighbors and active participation in community life gave the artisan not only practical benefits, but also a sense of security, which was invaluable in the face of constant danger. The community became a space where one felt a sense of significance and belonging, gaining strength to overcome difficulties that seemed impossible to overcome alone. This interdependence and cooperation served as the foundation for the development of craftsmanship, the formation of social bonds, and the maintenance of cultural traditions during the 14th century era. Night and reflection, hopes and fears. The night brought a long-awaited silence, pierced only by the quiet crackle of dying wood in the hearth, and the cold crept through the thin walls of the workshop, forcing the craftsman to wrap himself in meager rags. In these moments, lying on a stiff straw bed, thoughts turned to the family, to their health and safety, for in the 14th century, survival depended on the slightest of circumstances, and disease and war kept the family on their toes. Historical chronicles tell us that people of that time often woke up at night from fear of brigands, as well as anxiety about the future of their children and loss of earnings, which was a constant source of worry. In the silence of the night, the craftsman pondered the future of his business, how to keep his workshop and tools in order to start hard work again tomorrow, for craft was the only source of sustenance. Fear of disease such as the plague or economic hardship made it necessary to think about supplies and contingency plans, because every day could be a family's last. Hope, however, kept the spirit alive, the belief that effort and skill would help overcome any adversity and ensure a better tomorrow, despite the harsh realities of the era. Nighttime musings were often filled with thoughts of wars and raids, for the 14th century was a time of constant instability, with raids and conflicts becoming a real threat to artisans and their loved ones. The stories of loss and destruction from the elders came to mind, and my heart was filled with determination to protect my home and keep my family safe, for that was the top priority among all the worries. Night served as a moment of rest and preparation for the soul, when inner fears were confronted with the need to continue the struggle for life and well-being. Historical documents show that during these nocturnal hours, many wrote down plans, keeping primitive diaries or simply pondering important decisions so as not to lose control of their destiny. The artisan could pray or turn to spiritual advisors for comfort and strength, which helped him to remain steadfast in the face of adversity and uncertainty. Such moments of solitude and introspection built the resilient character that was necessary to survive the harsh conditions of medieval England. The night was a reminder of the fragility of life, but it also energized the new day, awakening hope that despite all the difficulties, the artisan and his family would be able to maintain their place in this harsh world. Thus ended a day filled with labor and cares, and ahead remained the dark night, a time when thoughts became clearer and the soul prepared to meet new challenges with courage and patience. These reflections were the essence of medieval existence, a constant struggle mixed with hope that warmed the heart on cold and anxious nights. Such were the everyday life of a medieval artisan, full of difficulties and dangers, but filled with resilience, perseverance, and hope for a better future. Every moment of life was a struggle for survival, where family, community, and craft became the mainstay in a harsh world. For those who are interested in history, researching little-known details and seeking to understand how people of bygone eras lived, this channel offers many fascinating videos about life in the Middle Ages, survival in difficult conditions, wars, and the cultural traditions that shaped our world. Don't miss new episodes. Together, we continue to explore the mysteries of the past and be inspired by the power of the human spirit. Subscribing, liking, and sharing the videos will help you learn more about the real-life stories of those times.